The ballroom is for real family. Your seat is in the kitchen. Lauren smiled when she said it. The sickeningly sweet scent of orange blossoms hung thick in the air, but beneath it, I could smell the grease and heat radiating from the swinging metal doors right behind my designated table. A heavy silence dropped over our corner of the Hawthorne Conservatory. The polite clinking of crystal glasses stopped completely. I stared at the heavy carved stock resting on the cheap linen of the overflow table. My name, Allison Mercer, was written in calligraphy. It was sharp, freshly cut, and the ink was still slightly tacky. This was not a mistake. My mother leaned in close. Her manicured fingers dug into my forearm. "Just do this for your sister, Allison," she whispered, her voice tight with that familiar warning. "Do not make a scene." Next to Lauren, Caleb shifted his weight. The groom tugged at his collar and looked anywhere but at me. "Let us just keep things calm," he muttered, trying to smooth over the tension. I looked at the three of them. At 38 years old, I was the founder and executive director of Haven House Family Center. I had spent 12 years building an organization to shelter people in crisis. But right now, standing in a venue paid for by funds I had personally raised, my family expected me to fold. They expected the Allison, who had slept on a vinyl hospital chair for 3 weeks when Mom was sick. They wanted the sister who had walked out of a final job interview 8 years ago just to bail Lauren out of a credit card lawsuit. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. Without saying a word, I opened the camera. I took a picture of the freshly printed place card. I stepped back and took another photo of the seating chart near the service entrance, then a wide shot of the kitchen doors propped open behind my assigned chair. Lauren let out a dry, theatrical laugh. "Of course you need documentation. You cannot just be normal for one night." I lowered my phone and met my sister's eyes. Only when people plan to deny what they did. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before the entitlement rushed back in. "You are just operations anyway," Lauren sneered, waving a hand toward the catering staff. "Today is my launch moment. It is about me." I nodded slowly. The heavy knot of obligation that had lived in my chest for over a decade finally dissolved. Thank you for finally saying it where everyone could hear. I set the place card face down on the table. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand an apology. I simply turned my back on the bride, the groom, and my mother, and began walking toward the conservatory exit. The string quartet scrambled to start playing again. The nervous, bright notes of a classical pop cover echoed off the glass ceiling as I pushed through the heavy double doors into the main hallway. The cool October evening air hit my face, clearing the suffocating smell of the floral arrangements. Lauren thought she had stripped me of my place. She had no idea what I was carrying in my leather tote. Tucked safely in an inside pocket was a sealed letter to the board of directors. Next to it sat a confirmation email from an independent auditor, scheduled to arrive at the Haven House offices at 8 o'clock Monday morning. And resting right at the bottom was a brass key to a townhouse I had purchased 6 months ago, using money from a consulting business my family did not even know existed. I did not need their table. I had already built my own house. I was halfway down the corridor when a loud, sharp noise stopped me. It was the sound of a heavy wooden chair scraping hard against the ballroom floor. I paused, expecting the muffled footsteps of someone quietly heading to the restroom to avoid the awkwardness. But the footsteps did not come. Instead, a voice rang out, clear and steady, cutting right through the music. It was Monica. I had helped her find safe housing and a job when she had 2 toddlers and $30 to her name. Now she was standing up at a table near the center of the room. "If she is not real family," Monica said, her voice carrying all the way out to the hallway, "neither am I." Before Lauren could respond, another chair scraped against the wood. Then another. The heavy glass door pushed open, cutting off the frantic string music from the ballroom. Monica stepped out into the cool October night. She did not hesitate. The woman walked straight up to me and wrapped her arms tightly around my shoulders. I felt the stiff, inexpensive fabric of her rented dress press against my collarbone. A year ago, I had sat with her in a municipal courthouse while she fought for a protective order. Tonight, she was the first person to stand up for me. I stepped back gently and told her she did not need to leave her dinner on my account. I knew how much effort she had put into finding a babysitter just to attend this event. Monica shook her head. Her dark eyes were perfectly clear. "I am not leaving because you asked," she said, her voice carrying an unshakable certainty. "I am leaving because she showed us who she is." Another scrape of wood against hardwood echoed from inside the conservatory. This one was louder, followed immediately by a second, and then a third. I turned toward the glass wall separating the hallway from the dining area. The movement inside was not synchronized. People did not rise in a dramatic, rehearsed wave. Instead, the realization seemed to pool at the edges of the room before bleeding inward. At table 12, a longtime staff member named Robert set his cloth napkin carefully next to his plate. He had run our food pantry for 8 years. He pushed his chair in, tapped his husband on the shoulder, and headed for the exit. 2 tables over, a father whose rent Haven House had covered during a brutal winter simply gathered his wife and teenage son. They did not say a word to anyone. They just walked. The exodus created a vacuum that the remaining guests struggled to understand. At the tables closest to the front, confusion rapidly curdled into suspicion. A major corporate donor, a man who had written a check for $20,000 just last month, leaned across the aisle to question my sister. He pointed toward the empty seat in the kitchen, clearly asking if I was truly just an administrative assistant, as the bride had claimed. Lauren forced a bright, terrifyingly tight smile. I could not hear her exact words through the thick glass, but her exaggerated hand gestures told the entire story. She fluttered her fingers, brushed her hair back, and laughed open-mouthed. The bride was trying to package the disaster as a quirky family misunderstanding. The donor did not smile back. He picked up his coat. The panic finally reached the sweetheart table. Caleb stood rigidly beside his new wife. His mother, an imposing woman in a silver gown, leaned across the floral centerpiece. She pointed a manicured finger directly at the kitchen doors. Her mouth moved in sharp-clipped syllables, demanding to know why a community appreciation event was publicly humiliating the founder of the organization. Lauren gestured frantically in my direction, clearly trying to shift the blame. Caleb looked down at his bride. His posture went completely stiff, and he took a half step away from her. Then Nadia made her move. Our board president was a retired public accountant. She never raised her voice, and she never acted without weighing the consequences. Nadia stood up slowly. She placed her napkin on the table and smoothed the front of her dress. When she spoke, her voice cut cleanly through the lingering murmurs, loud enough to drift through the cracked hallway doors. This is no longer a family matter when you use a charitable organization's name to fund your party. Nadia turned and walked out. That statement broke the final dam. People began spilling out into the hallway and the courtyard beyond. Dozens of guests milled around the manicured hedges under the patio lights. A few younger attendees pulled out their phones to record the chaos. I stepped forward immediately. Raising my hands, I thanked everyone for their support, but I firmly asked them to put their cameras away. Many of these families had fled terrible situations. They needed anonymity, and their faces did not belong on the internet as collateral damage in a Mercer family dispute. The heavy conservatory doors suddenly slammed open. Lauren marched out into the cool air. The train of her white gown dragged heavily across the concrete path, picking up dead leaves and dirt. She ignored the murmuring crowd and marched straight up to me. Her practiced bridal smile had completely vanished, replaced by a tight, furious grimace. "You need to get back inside and fix this right now," Lauren demanded. Her voice was shrill, vibrating with genuine outrage. I looked at the woman I had protected since our father died. I saw the familiar expectation in her eyes. She genuinely believed I would apologize to the crowd, claim it was a joke, and usher everyone back to their assigned seats. She needed me to play my role. "I spent 12 years fixing what you broke," I told her, keeping my tone perfectly level. That ended tonight. Lauren stared at me as if the ground had just opened up between us. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She spun around and faced the courtyard, hoping the guests would rally around the crying bride. No one moved toward her. Inside the ballroom, the infrastructure of the wedding was quietly collapsing. The catering staff had stopped pouring wine. Several waiters were huddled near the kitchen doors, waiting for the venue manager to confirm who was actually paying for the prime rib. A group of Lauren's college friends whispered frantically near the coat check before slipping out a side exit, desperate to avoid the brewing scandal. Caleb's parents walked out of the main hall together. Their faces were pale and grim. They grabbed their son by the arm and pulled him into a private bridal suite down the corridor, shutting the door firmly behind them. The ballroom was empty of guests. My sister stood completely alone in the center of the massive room. She was surrounded by 148 untouched plates and dozens of wilting orange blossom arrangements. Lauren spun around in a slow circle, her hands clutching the heavy satin fabric of her dress. "Where are you all going?" she screamed. The raw, desperate sound echoed off the high glass ceilings. Out in the courtyard, several camera flashes went off simultaneously. People were no longer filming the beneficiaries. They were recording the bride demanding an audience from an empty room. Nadia walked up to stand beside me in the hallway. The board president did not bother looking at the spectacle unfolding on the other side of the glass. She simply looked down at her phone. The screen cast a pale blue glow over her face. "Allison," Nadia said quietly, her professional demeanor perfectly intact. "We just got an automated alert from the server." She tilted the device so I could read the notification. The text confirmed that Lauren's administrative account had just attempted to permanently delete a directory. The system had blocked the action due to the legal hold we had enacted 10 days ago. I focused on the specific name of the protected file path. It was labeled Mercer Foundation Launch. I looked back up at Nadia. The cool night air suddenly felt very sharp against my skin. "That folder," I said, "did not exist yesterday. The collapse of my sister's wedding did not actually begin in that humid conservatory ballroom. The foundation had cracked 6 months earlier, on a cold Tuesday afternoon, when the rain was beating heavily against my office window at Haven House. My phone buzzed against the wooden desk, vibrating loudly enough to rattle a cup of pens. The caller ID displayed my mother's name. I answered, expecting a question about dinner plans, but Deborah did not ask how my day was going. The woman simply launched into a frantic, breathless explanation about a ballooning event budget. An expensive credit card bill was suddenly due, the caterer required a larger deposit, and the custom dress designer was threatening to cancel an order. Mom expected me to open my wallet and fix the deficit, just like I had always done whenever the golden child overreached. "I stopped paying expenses that are not mine 6 months ago," I said, keeping my eyes locked on the quarterly financial spreadsheet glowing on my monitor. Total silence hung on the line for a long 3 seconds. Then, the matriarch of the Mercer family sucked in a sharp theatrical breath. She snapped that my sister was under a tremendous amount of stress and needed support. Her voice trembled with manufactured disappointment as she called me incredibly selfish. I did not argue or attempt to defend my character. I simply ended the call and placed the device face down on the desk, feeling the cold metal casing against my palm. That evening, I did not drive back to the cramped apartment my family believed I still rented. I drove to the east side of Columbus, pulled into a quiet suburban street lined with mature oak trees, and unlocked the front door of a small brick townhouse. Until Lauren searched the public property records, no one in my bloodline had known the address. My mother did not possess a spare key, and Lauren had never stepped foot inside the hallway. The living room was still half empty, holding only a comfortable gray sofa, a sturdy oak desk, and an unopened can of blue paint sitting near the baseboards. I walked into the narrow kitchen, poured a glass of cold tap water, and felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. This was not some sprawling secret mansion funded by a sudden windfall. The drywall was slightly uneven, and the plumbing occasionally hummed when the heater kicked on. But I had bought the property entirely by myself, carefully building the down payment over 2 years of relentless discipline. I sat down at my desk and transferred a set portion of my weekly paycheck into an emergency savings account. Then I opened my laptop to conduct a meeting with my very first consulting client. Operating under the name Mercer Community Systems, I was helping another local charity audit their data privacy protocols. Lauren had always mocked my obsession with compliance, laughing at what she called boring paperwork for invisible people. Yet that very paperwork was quietly funding my escape route, allowing me to build a safety net that did not rely on family approval. For a long time, I had genuinely believed that swallowing my own ambition was the necessary price of admission to our family table. I remembered skipping a specialized nonprofit management seminar in Chicago because Mom had suffered a severe panic attack, leaving me to sleep on a stiff vinyl hospital chair for 3 nights. I clearly recalled draining my meager savings account to cover Lauren's overdue rent, standing in a brightly lit leasing office to apologize to an angry property manager while my sister sat comfortably out in her car. After every manufactured crisis, Deborah would pat my arm and declare that family always takes care of their own. Meanwhile, my younger sister never once said thank you. On the night I signed the closing papers for the townhouse, I had taken a black pen and written a single sentence on the first page of a fresh notebook. Helping is a choice, but being used is not. The ultimate test of that new boundary arrived 3 months before the wedding invitations were mailed. Jasmine, our meticulous operations coordinator, knocked softly and walked into my office. She placed a freshly printed invoice squarely in the center of my desk. The thick paper felt unusually stiff under my fingertips. Jasmine silently pointed to a charge for exactly $4,800. The vendor was listed as an expensive boutique florist located downtown, and the internal billing code simply read Donor Floral Engagement. My jaw immediately tightened. I recognized the distinct name of that flower shop. Just 3 days earlier, Lauren had posted a glossy photo from that exact boutique while trying on imported silk veil samples. I did not immediately march down the hall to accuse the director of community partnerships of embezzling funds. Shouting matches only gave manipulative people a chance to play the victim. Instead, I handed the paper back to Jasmine and asked her to pull the original digital file, the full event code history, and the proposed payment schedule from the server. We needed raw, verifiable data before we drew any conclusions. 10 minutes later, the original digital document glowed brightly on my screen. I used my mouse to zoom in on the bottom right corner of the page. Tucked discreetly beneath a blurry watercolor rendering of a floral arch was a delicate, interlocking monogram. An ornate L and a cursive C were wrapped around a specific Saturday date in October. The file name on our internal server read Community Outreach Banquet. But the underlying electronic metadata told a completely different story. The hidden author properties clearly listed the project title as the Lauren and Caleb Wedding. My office door clicked shut. Jasmine stood just inside the room, holding 2 more printed sheets of paper against her chest. Her hands were shaking slightly as she walked forward. The young woman placed the documents next to my keyboard without speaking a single word. They were 2 additional invoices from the identical boutique florist. Every single charge hovered just a few $100s below the $5,000 threshold. According to the foundational rules of Haven House, any single expense over $5,000 triggered an automatic board review, requiring 2 executive signatures instead of 1. I stared at the 3 pieces of paper lined up on my desk, watching my sister's financial strategy come into sharp, devastating focus. "She did not make a mistake," I said quietly, tapping my index finger against the final fabricated invoice. "She learned the limit." Jasmine and I spent the next 3 hours turning my office floor into a paper map of fraud. We color-coded the printed vendor histories with highlighters, grouping the charges by payee and event code. Yellow ink marked the videography team. Blue covered the custom gift bags. Green highlighted the ballroom rental fees. Every single category contained multiple invoices sliced neatly beneath the $5,000 review threshold, and they all shared the exact same donor outreach classification. I stared at the bright patchwork of paper spreading across the carpet. The truly terrifying part was not the money we could easily track. It was the money we could not see, because several massive vendor commitments likely remained unbilled until after the event concluded. I did not march down the hall to confront my sister. Instead, I packed the files into a secure briefcase and met Nadia at a small coffee shop 10 blocks away from the Haven House campus. The smell of roasted espresso beans and damp wool coats filled the cramped space. I slid the transaction map across the scratched wooden table, carefully explaining which data points were verified facts and which pieces remained educated theories. The board president did not gasp or express dramatic outrage. She simply adjusted her glasses, read through the highlighted rows, and took a slow sip from her ceramic mug. Nadia explicitly ordered me not to search my sister's personal emails or initiate any direct confrontation. We needed to protect the organization first. Sitting in that noisy cafe, she authorized a silent legal hold on all internal server data. Then she formally scheduled an independent corporate audit to begin the Monday immediately following the wedding. The need for strict protocol became painfully clear the very next afternoon. I was walking past the front reception desk when Olivia arrived. The professional wedding planner carried a thick leather binder tucked tightly against her chest, and she smelled strongly of expensive floral perfume. When I politely asked if she needed help locating the donor reception files, her eyes darted toward the elevator bank. Olivia shifted her weight, offered a vague excuse about reviewing catering logistics, and hurried away down the corridor. I watched the woman disappear around the corner. I did not follow her or attempt to steal a glance at the binder. I simply returned to my desk and documented the brief encounter in a secure log, knowing her nervous evasion meant more financial landmines were hidden in those pages. Lauren did not act like a person standing on the edge of a corporate investigation. Later that week, my sister marched into my office holding a glossy presentation folder. Deborah walked closely behind her, carrying a cup of tea and a familiar expression of maternal pressure. Lauren dropped the folder directly onto my keyboard. Inside sat the branding blueprints for the Mercer Family Foundation, complete with a launch timeline scheduled for the night of the wedding. Tucked behind the logo designs was a formal letter of verification. The document falsely declared that we had founded Haven House together as equal partners. My mother placed her hand on my shoulder, gently squeezing the tense muscles. She suggested that I should not be petty over a simple ceremonial title, insisting that sharing the credit would look wonderful for the wealthy donors. I did not raise my voice or argue about the past 12 years of my life. I calmly picked up a red pen, circled the fabricated timelines on the document, and handed the papers back across the desk. Then I opened my email client, typed a short message stating that I would never sign a statement I knew to be false, and hit send. In that same thread, I formally transferred all large outreach approval powers to Nadia for the remainder of the fiscal quarter. Lauren snatched the folder off the desk. Her practiced smile evaporated, leaving behind a cold, flat stare. She warned me that I was going to deeply regret embarrassing my own blood in front of the Warren family. The true depth of that threat did not reveal itself until the next morning. Jasmine was running a routine server backup on the administrative accounts. Lauren had carelessly left her Haven House tablet synced to her personal messages, a common oversight that Nadia had specifically directed our technical department to collect under the active legal hold. A captured notification preview appeared on the administrative monitor just as I walked into the server room. It was a message Lauren had sent directly to our mother. The text did not mention the foundation or the impending audit. It simply laid out the exact terms of my punishment. The screen glowed brightly in the dim room, displaying the stark words: "If she will not give me the title, she does not get a place at the family table." I stood completely still, listening to the low hum of the server cooling fans. The kitchen seating arrangement was not going to be a last-minute mistake or a catering error. Lauren had planned the public humiliation as a deliberate, calculated eviction. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It vibrated once against my palm. A new message from Deborah appeared on my lock screen, instructing me to wear something simple and demanding that I not draw any attention away from the bride. 2 days before the ceremony, my laptop chimed with an email from the State Department of Family Services. The attached digital document contained a formal offer for a regional director position. The salary printed on the second page was substantial, easily enough to replace my current income. And the role offered a clean, immediate exit from the chaotic mess my sister was currently creating. I read through the contract twice, feeling the smooth glass of the trackpad beneath my fingers, but I did not type my electronic signature. The independent audit still needed to run its course. If I walked away right then, the organization I had built from the ground up would be swallowed whole by a fake foundation. Pulling open the bottom drawer of my heavy oak desk, I took out 3 thick manila envelopes. Into the first, I slid a drafted letter of conditional resignation. The second held the complete transaction timeline Jasmine and I had built for the board of directors. The third envelope contained the unsigned state contract. I tucked all three securely into the inner pocket of my leather tote bag. They were not weapons designed for a family argument, but rather a quiet insurance policy. I would only pull them out if the bride actually attempted to hijack the charity in front of our major donors. My mother arrived at my front door that same evening, stepping onto the porch of my townhouse for the very first time. After I refused to sign the foundation letter, Lauren had searched the county property records under my name and sent Deborah the address. So much for the privacy I had spent 6 months protecting. Deborah stared at the solid brick exterior and the new brass numbers bolted next to the mailbox, and her mouth hung slightly open in genuine shock. Walking into the small living room, the woman touched the back of my new sofa as if it were stolen property. The matriarch of the Mercer family immediately accused me of betrayal, demanding to know how I could purchase real estate without consulting her. I calmly reminded her that a grown woman did not need maternal permission to establish a permanent address. Her face tightened, and she instantly pivoted to her primary objective. She ordered me to sign the foundation documents and surrender the co-founder title to keep the peace. I looked her directly in the eye and refused. The pressure tactics shifted the following morning. My phone rang while I was pouring a cup of dark roast coffee. Olivia, the wedding planner, spoke in a rushed, overly bright tone. The woman called to explicitly confirm my requested seat near the catering doors. My grip tightened on the warm ceramic mug. Someone had clearly fed the planner a lie about my seating preferences, and correcting it over a verbal phone call would leave no solid evidence. I kept my voice perfectly even, thanked the professional for her diligence, and asked her to email me the finalized seating chart with the exact revision notes attached. That simple request secured another vital piece of the paper trail. The rehearsal dinner took place that Friday night in a rented country club dining room. While the groomsmen practiced their speeches, I stood near the back wall and watched an audiovisual technician test the projection equipment. The massive white screen suddenly lit up. High-definition photographs of Monica and her 2 young children flashed across the wall, overlaid with a massive watermark for the Mercer Family Foundation. A wave of cold nausea hit my stomach. I knew exactly what our legal consent forms dictated, and they absolutely prohibited using vulnerable client images for personal branding or unapproved private funds. Marching straight to the audio board, I instructed the technician to cut the feed until the usage rights were verified. Lauren rushed across the room, her heels clicking loudly against the hardwood floor. A manicured finger jabbed toward my chest as the bride loudly accused me of being jealous of her success. She promised the video would run during the reception regardless of my complaints. Nadia met me in the country club parking lot afterward. The cool night air carried the sharp scent of fresh-cut grass and expensive exhaust fumes. Our board president leaned against the side of her sedan and softly suggested that I simply stay home on Saturday. Skipping the wedding would protect me from whatever public trap my sister was setting, but staying away meant abandoning the vulnerable families who genuinely thought they were attending a charity appreciation dinner. Furthermore, if I vanished, the bride would use my absence as silent proof that her new foundation was legitimate and fully approved. I told Nadia I would attend. I was not going to show up as a desperate relative begging for a chair, but rather as an executive protecting her community. The final piece of the puzzle arrived on the morning of the wedding. My laptop chimed with a new message from Olivia. I opened the attached document and scanned the vast array of circular tables filling the Hawthorne Conservatory ballroom. My name was completely absent from the main floor. I scrolled to the very bottom of the page, finding a small appendix meant only for the catering staff. Printed right next to my name was a direct note from the bride. It stated that I was allowed kitchen access only, and I was not to move without bride approval. Sunday morning sunlight cut harshly through my living room blinds, and the digital clock on my desk read exactly 8 o'clock when the emergency board meeting connected. 9 small video squares populated my laptop screen. Nadia stared directly into her camera, looking perfectly rested despite the chaotic events of the previous night. Our board president formally initiated the emergency session without offering any polite greetings. She declared an immediate, system-wide freeze on all organizational assets, data directories, and privacy records. The sweeping resolution suspended Lauren from all administrative access, formally revoked her corporate spending card, and locked down every single unapproved expense code pending an independent review. A new video feed popped into the grid a few seconds later. My sister sat in her marital living room, still wearing smudged mascara and the heavy diamond earrings from the ceremony. Lauren did not waste a single breath on an apology or an explanation. The bride stared directly into the lens and delivered a practiced, tearful monologue. She accused me of harboring deep resentment toward her happiness, claiming I had deliberately manipulated vulnerable clients to stage a protest and ruin her wedding. Her voice cracked perfectly as she demanded my immediate removal as executive director. Nadia did not argue, nor did she raise her voice to defend my character. The board president simply adjusted her glasses, shared her screen with the group, and pressed play on a compiled video file. The footage gathered clips from the official wedding photographer, alongside cell phone recordings from 3 independent guests. Audio from the glass hallway played clearly through my laptop speakers. My own recorded voice firmly asked the departing attendees to respect client privacy and put their cameras away. A second clip showed Monica speaking loudly near the exit, stating clearly that she had received no prior warning about the kitchen seating or the walkout. The board members watched the irrefutable proof in complete silence. When the final video ended, Nadia calmly stated that the visual evidence thoroughly disproved any theory of a staged, malicious protest. That definitive failure only made Lauren pivot harder. The young woman held up a piece of paper to her webcam, proudly displaying the verification letter bearing Deborah's freshly inked signature. I did not raise my voice or react to the obvious forgery unfolding on the screen. Instead, I opened a separate window and uploaded our official state incorporation documents, the very first board meeting minutes, and 12 years of detailed grant history into the shared chat box. None of those legal files contained my sister's name. Furthermore, Jasmine had already pulled the hidden metadata on the exact file Lauren was holding up. The digital properties proved the document had been created a mere 10 days prior, entirely invalidating its presentation as a historical corporate record. Deborah's square lit up as the system registered background noise from her microphone. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her dining room chair, stubbornly refusing to meet my eyes on the monitor. When Nadia asked her directly if she had actually read the legal text before signing it, the older woman dodged the question entirely. My mother defensively insisted that everyone in town knew Lauren had helped build the center, framing her signature as an act of familial loyalty rather than legal perjury. I watched the woman who raised me desperately try to rewrite history just to protect her favorite child from the consequences of fraud. A family story is not a corporate record, I said, keeping my tone entirely neutral as I muted my microphone. The digital waiting room chimed softly. Nadia admitted Olivia into the secure call. The wedding planner appeared alongside a stern-looking attorney, and she looked absolutely exhausted, lacking any of the polished confidence from the rehearsal dinner. Olivia immediately explained her genuine belief that the catering package was a fully approved donor reception. To prove her absolute innocence, her lawyer formally requested screen-sharing permissions from the board. An email thread appeared before the entire executive committee. It was a direct message, sent from Lauren to the event planner 2 months ago. The text outlined a very specific financial strategy. Split the invoices and bill anything guest-facing to outreach, the message read. Allison will not review the quarter until after the wedding. I sat back in my desk chair and let out a slow breath. Olivia was completely innocent, and her desperate defense had just provided the exact weapon we needed to prove deliberate, calculated intent. The board's legal counsel leaned into his microphone, his expression completely flat. He asked Olivia if she currently possessed the original, unedited venue contracts. Olivia nodded quickly, her heavy earrings swaying with the movement. Yes. And the nonprofit card paid the first deposit. The planner clicked a button, bringing a scanned financial document onto the shared screen. I stared at the bold numbers printed next to the initial deposit line. The amount was staggering on its own, easily enough to fund our emergency shelter for an entire month. Yet my stomach tightened as a terrifying mathematical realization settled over me. That massive deposit represented just one of the 11 distinct contracts we had found scattered across the server. Over the next 6 weeks, the independent auditors reconstructed every payment, contract, and vendor communication connected to the wedding. I formally stepped back from financial approval authority, so no one could claim the investigation was personal. The final report identified $48,600 in personal wedding expenses and unauthorized commitments. Lauren had divided the charges across 11 invoices, keeping each one below the $5,000 threshold that required dual approval. The pattern eliminated any possibility that this had been an innocent accounting error. My sister reacted to the impending public disclosure with a desperate, scorched earth media campaign. She took to social media with a manic energy, filming shaky videos where she claimed the wedding was merely an innovative partnership between a fundraiser and a private event. She cast herself as the victim of a jealous, overbearing older sister who was punishing her for being the more popular sibling. I refused to engage. I did not post a single rebuttal or clarify my position in the comments section. Instead, I worked with our communications lead to publish a brief formal statement confirming that the organization was conducting a comprehensive internal investigation and that protecting the privacy of our vulnerable clients remained our absolute top priority. The true weight of the deception did not hit until Jasmine pulled the internal consent forms. We sat in the server room, the hum of the cooling fans a constant, low drone against the silence. Jasmine cross-referenced every high-resolution photograph from the wedding albums against our signed usage agreements. 7 separate families had granted us permission to use their stories in internal annual reports or private donor presentations, but absolutely none of them had authorized their faces to be used for the Mercer Family Foundation branding. Worse, the digital files showed that several photographs of young children had been crudely edited with added text slogans, turning their personal struggles into marketing copy for my sister's vanity project. I personally met with Monica in the quiet corner of our common room before the audit results became public knowledge. I apologized until my throat felt raw, explaining that my own systemic failures had allowed this violation to occur. Monica did not look at me with pity or anger. She simply touched my arm and said that the truth had to be told, regardless of the discomfort, so that no one else would ever be exploited by the same person again. The situation spiraled into something much darker when Renee, another mother from our long-term housing program, arrived at my desk on a rainy Tuesday. She held a printed screenshot from my sister's wedding gallery. Her face was flushed, and her hands were trembling as she pointed toward a large screen in the background of the wedding photos. A high-resolution portrait of her daughter, a child who had never consented to public exposure, was displayed right next to a giant Mercer Family Foundation logo. I quickly checked our database, knowing full well that Renee had never signed a consent form. The photograph had been lifted directly from our private, internal case management software. My stomach did not just drop. It felt as though it had vanished entirely. "That picture was never public," Renee whispered, her eyes searching mine for an explanation I could not possibly provide. Jasmine immediately initiated a forensic trace on the image access logs to see how the file had left our secure server. I hovered behind her chair, watching the cursor blink across the monitor as the system retrieved the usage history. The result was a chilling impossibility. The photograph had been accessed using Lauren's secure, single sign on administrative credentials. However, the accompanying network metadata confirmed that the request had originated from a remote, home-based IP address that was completely disconnected from the main office server. The final piece of the forensic trace arrived on the screen, showing the exact time the file was transferred to an external storage device. It was a Wednesday evening, during the rehearsal dinner weekend. I leaned in, my heart thumping against my ribs as I read the location data. Lauren had been standing on the country club terrace at that exact moment, busy greeting wedding guests and practicing her vows. She could not have possibly been the person sitting at a computer, logging into our secure software, and pulling a private client file to send to her own personal email. I looked at the access log one last time, watching the digital timestamp flicker. The session had occurred on a laptop specifically registered to the staff pool, the exact machine I had seen sitting on our mother's dining room table just 3 days prior. I felt a cold, jagged realization pierce through me, sharper than anything I had experienced in the ballroom. The credentials belonged to my sister, but the physical hands that had manipulated the secure software to steal that child's image belonged to someone else entirely. Renee waited for an answer, her gaze fixed on the stolen photo of her daughter. I could not give her the truth yet, not when the implications were so destructive. I promised her that we would get to the bottom of the security breach immediately. As she walked out of my office, I locked the door and stared at the empty chair where my sister used to sit, fully understanding that I was no longer just fighting an embezzler. I was facing an entirely different and much more dangerous opponent who had been hiding in plain sight all along. I stared at the screen for a long time, watching the cursor blink in the empty space where the answer should have been. Jasmine had already confirmed that Haven House had never created an administrative account for our mother, nor had we ever granted the older woman any authorized access to our secure client network. I walked over to the supply closet and pulled out the physical audit log for the staff pool laptops. The entry for that specific machine showed it had been checked out to Lauren for the entire wedding weekend. I checked my phone. A hidden backup file, which Lauren had synced to our network under the guise of an organizational project, contained a string of deleted text messages. I scrolled until I found the exchange sent on the Wednesday evening of the rehearsal dinner. Lauren had written to Mom, telling her the laptop was unlocked and sitting on the dining table. My sister explicitly instructed her to navigate into the Secure Client Story Review folder, locate Renee's daughter, and forward the file immediately. Deborah had simply complied, using her personal email to transmit the stolen property. When I finally confronted the woman who raised me in the quiet of her home, she dismissed the gravity of the theft. She claimed she was only looking for a nice picture for Lauren's wedding slideshow, as if that erased the violation. She insisted that Haven House was a family asset, to which I replied that the organization belonged to the community we served, not to us. The next piece of the audit revealed the origin of the false documentation. Jasmine discovered that the forged verification letter, the one Lauren had tried to use to claim the status of a co-founder, was created on Deborah's own home computer 10 days before the ceremony. Mom had signed the document without ever consulting the board or verifying the claims. She told me she only wanted her two daughters to be treated as equals, but I told her that equality did not give her the right to steal my professional history and gift it to someone else. The most damning evidence was the restoration of our internal backup server, which recovered the full context of the messages Deborah had tried to hide. The preview window showed the matriarch writing a directive for Lauren to move me somewhere out of sight for the reception, specifically because the night was supposed to be about the bride. Lauren had replied that the kitchen access would be the perfect way to remind me of where I belonged in the family hierarchy. It was not a random act of spite. It was a premeditated eviction. I turned my attention to the Warren family. Caleb's parents contacted me late that week, forwarding the confidential sponsor packet Lauren had sent them only 48 hours before the ceremony. The materials were marked with an ominous note, asking them not to speak to Caleb about the project because it was intended to be a grand surprise for the groom. They had not yet transferred any funds, but they had been effectively duped by a package containing my digital signature, which Lauren had clearly copied from old personnel files. The groom, upon realizing his bride had used his family name to manufacture a foundation that did not exist, finally began to see the pattern of manipulation he had ignored for so long. Caleb brought his attorney to the final confrontation with Lauren. He asked the bride a single, piercing question, demanding to know if I had ever granted her permission to represent my work to his parents. Lauren did not answer him directly, choosing instead to pivot to her usual script about how I was a controlling older sister who could not handle her happiness. Caleb did not buy it this time. He took a long, steady look at his new wife, walked out of their shared home, and made it clear he would not protect the facade of a marriage built entirely on financial fraud. Deborah returned to my townhouse one final time, though she no longer held any claim to step through the door. The woman begged me to categorize the audit as a simple administrative misunderstanding, desperate to avoid the scrutiny of the state charity regulators. I told her I would ensure she had a place to live and proper care as she aged, but I would not lie to protect Lauren. I would not cover her debts, and I would not stay silent. A notification on my laptop pulled me away from the memory. It was an urgent call from our legal counsel. The state regulatory agency had officially requested our full report, and Lauren was now demanding a formal mediation session before the file was turned over to the prosecutor. My sister's attorney claimed she wanted to resolve the matter quietly, but the condition for the meeting was my personal attendance. She still believed I would save her. She thought the memory of the promise I made after our father passed would be enough to force my hand, but she had fundamentally misunderstood the nature of that commitment. I would have protected a child, but I would not protect an adult from the consequences of their own choices. I picked up my bag and headed for the door, finally ready to close the final chapter of the life I had never actually owned. The mediation room in the downtown law office felt nothing like the chaotic, heated atmosphere of the wedding ballroom. The air was cool, sterile, and smelled faintly of expensive floor wax. Lauren sat on the opposite side of a long mahogany table, her eyes red and puffy, though she maintained a posture of carefully orchestrated fragility. Her attorney sat to her right, a man with a gray suit and an even grayer expression, while Nadia and our own counsel occupied the chairs beside me. My sister reached across the table, her hands trembling as she pushed a single sheet of paper toward me. It was an offer. Lauren promised to reimburse a portion of the stolen funds if I would sign a statement declaring the entire incident a series of administrative errors and formally withdraw our data complaints from the regulatory office. "We can just move past this, Allison," Lauren whispered, her voice cracking with the rehearsed tremor she used to use to get me to bail her out of trouble as a teenager. "Think about what the scandal will do to Haven House if it becomes a criminal case. You have always been the one to protect this family. Do not destroy it now." I did not reach for the paper. I watched the woman who had once been my closest companion, witnessing the way she transitioned from a weeping victim to a sharp, threatening adversary in the space of a single heartbeat. When she realized her tears were failing to move me, her jaw tightened. The facade fell away, revealing the cold, calculating hunger I had ignored for years. She hissed that I was throwing away everything she had built, threatening that the ensuing press coverage would burn our organization to the ground. I gestured to my attorney, who stood and placed a thick, organized binder in the center of the table. He did not raise his voice, nor did he offer any emotional commentary. He simply began presenting the evidence piece by piece. He walked them through the incriminating email, where Lauren explicitly directed staff to bill guest-facing expenses to Outreach, the forensic access logs showing her stolen credentials, the original contracts, and the sponsor packets containing the forged signature she had created to deceive the Warren family. Lauren tried to deflect every single charge, attempting to throw Olivia the wedding planner and our mother under the bus. But Olivia's legal team had already submitted a sworn timeline proving my sister had been the sole architect of every deceptive command. Deborah had signed the forged documents, yet the physical evidence showed the older woman had been acting as a blind instrument for her younger daughter's ambitions, not as the mastermind. The process took several grueling months of depositions, legal filings, and tense negotiations. There were no cameras, no dramatic walkouts, and no singular moments of catharsis. There was only the slow, grinding machinery of justice. By the time the final settlement was reached, the cold autumn had faded into a wet, gray spring. Lauren agreed to a comprehensive restitution plan, paying back the full amount of the embezzled or misallocated funds, covering the independent audit expenses, and permanently removing all unauthorized photographs from her personal and professional platforms. She pleaded guilty to one core charge of financial deception, which resulted in 3 years of supervised probation, 300 hours of mandatory community service, and a long-term prohibition against holding any financial oversight role in a charitable organization. The social fallout was just as absolute as the legal one. Lauren was fired from her role. The Mercer Family Foundation never officially launched, and her industry connections withered away once the reality of her actions became public record. Caleb, after seeking extensive advice from his own counsel, decided to pursue a standard divorce rather than seeking an annulment. The process was not a quick or painless affair, even without minor children or significant shared real estate, but it finally severed the last thread of the union built on lies. Deborah lost her honorary board position, and under the pressure of the audit, the older woman was forced to issue a public retraction regarding the false claim that Lauren had been a co-founder of our organization. The final meeting occurred on a Tuesday, when the air finally began to warm. As we walked out of the sterile building, Lauren blocked my path near the lobby elevators. The woman looked small, stripped of the influence and the curated image she had spent years constructing. "You took everything from me," she spat, her eyes flashing with a final, futile anger. I looked at her, not with hatred, but with a clarity I had never possessed before. "No, Lauren. I simply stopped standing between you and what you did." She stared at me, searching for some crack in my resolve, some sign that I would reach out and offer her one final escape. "Who is going to help me now?" she asked, her voice hovering somewhere between a demand and a plea. "The same person who should have learned to help you years ago," I said, turning toward the sunlight streaming through the lobby windows. "You." I walked out of the office building and onto the sidewalk. My phone chimed with a new message notification. It was a new message from the State Department. The original regional director offer had expired months earlier. But after the investigation closed, they had invited me to apply for a newly created part-time advisory position. At the same moment, my phone vibrated with a second call. Nadia was asking whether I would stay and oversee the final phase of the Haven House restructuring. At the same moment, I felt the vibration of a second call. Nadia was on the line, asking if I would be willing to stay on as the permanent executive director to oversee the final phase of the Haven House restructuring. For the very first time in my adult life, I stood on the sidewalk and did not think about what my mother expected, what the donors required, or what Lauren would demand. I thought only about the life I actually wanted to build. The weight of the empty envelopes in my tote had long ago disappeared, replaced by the simple, quiet gravity of my own choices. I took a deep breath, let the city air fill my lungs, and decided that for once, I was going to be the one to write the story. Nadia and I sat in my small office, 3 days after the legal resolution, the air finally feeling clear of the suffocating tension that had defined the past year. I did not accept the permanent executive director position immediately. Instead, I laid out a rigorous set of conditions that went far beyond mere financial oversight. I demanded that our board establish complete independence, strictly banning any family members or honorary positions from holding automatic voting seats. I required mandatory, transparent dual authorization for every single expenditure, regardless of the amount. Furthermore, I insisted on quarterly third-party access audits and the creation of 3 permanent board seats exclusively for representatives chosen by our program beneficiaries. Nadia listened to every requirement with a grave expression, then slowly nodded her head. The board voted to accept every one of my stipulations. They understood that the only way to save the organization was to strip away the legacy of the Mercer family control. I formally declined the honorary Mercer family title, insisting that the charity remain simply Haven House. It belonged to the people who relied on it, not to the name on the front door. I eventually accepted a part-time consulting role with the State Department, which allowed me to keep a professional distance while I continued guiding the Haven House restructuring process. My independent consulting firm gained a small but steady stream of clients, giving me the financial security to know that my identity was no longer tethered to a single institution or a single household. I had finally built a life where no one person could strip me of my agency. My mother moved into a managed senior living community located on the northern edge of the city. The new apartment was small, clean, and provided the specialized care she needed. I visited her every other Sunday afternoon, keeping our interactions polite and contained within the boundaries of a scheduled hour. We did not discuss the past, and I refused to entertain any attempts to reframe her role in Lauren's deception. When she would occasionally sigh and mention how much she missed the way things used to be, I would simply stand up, offer a gentle goodbye, and walk out. I no longer required a perfect apology to justify holding my boundaries. Lauren continued her mandatory community service hours in a municipal administrative office that had no connection to our financial networks. The woman lived in a cramped studio apartment downtown and had long ago ceased the public displays of vanity. I did not track her movements, nor did I take any pleasure in her reduced circumstances. When she once tried to text me a photo of an overdue utility bill, asking if I would cover it, I did not reply. I forwarded the message to my attorney and blocked the contact string, firmly establishing that I was no longer the custodian of her mistakes. It is now June, 8 months after that humid night in the conservatory, and the warmth of the early summer has finally settled over Columbus. Tonight, Haven House is holding our annual community dinner. We did not rent out a pretentious glass-walled venue this time. We simply pushed all the heavy furniture to the edges of our own main hall. The space is filled with the honest sounds of laughter, the clatter of silverware, and the scent of homemade dishes. Monica, Jasmine, and Nadia are all here, moving through the crowd with an ease that suggests they finally feel the organization belongs to them. Every image we display this evening has been vetted through a transparent, documented consent process. There are no watermarks of private foundations or self-serving slogans, just the smiling faces of people who finally have a secure place to sleep. Everyone brought a different dish to share, and the long rows of tables are mismatched, sturdy, and entirely functional. I spot a small, empty chair situated near the end of a long table, right between Renee and Jasmine. It would be easy to walk over and sit there. I help pass a heavy platter of roasted vegetables down the line, my hands steady and my breathing slow. I do not sit in a position of honor at the head of the room. I simply slide into the open chair, listening to the people around me share stories of their recent successes. Monica leans over, setting her fork down as she looks at the packed room. She reminds me of the night in the conservatory and asks if I had known all along that the guests would follow me out. I look at the sea of faces, realizing that for the first time in my life, I am not leading a protest, I am not managing a crisis, and I am not fixing a broken family narrative. I did not know, I tell her, and it is the absolute truth. If nobody had stood up, I still would have walked out alone. I would have gone back to my townhouse, and I would have filed the audit paperwork the next morning anyway. The hall is loud, vibrant, and alive, with the genuine connections we spent years trying to foster. Lauren had sent me to the kitchen because she thought it was where invisible women belonged, a place she felt was beneath the dignity of her manufactured fairy tale. She was right about one thing, though. Kitchens were where families were actually made, built on the slow, deliberate work of nourishing one another. My sister had simply never possessed the capacity to understand who got to call one home. I take a bite of the food on my plate, feeling the genuine warmth of the room settling into my bones. I am finally sitting exactly where I belong. You deserve to realize that protecting your peace is not an act of selfishness, but a necessary requirement for your own survival. Throughout this journey, the most important lesson you must take away is that you cannot fix someone who benefits from the very chaos they create, no matter how much you sacrifice or how long you wait for them to change. You may have spent years believing that your value was tied to your ability to absorb the consequences of others' mistakes, but that dynamic only serves to drain your spirit until you have nothing left to give yourself. When you finally decide to walk away from a toxic system, you are not failing those who depended on your silence. You are reclaiming the authority to define your own worth outside of their projections. True family is never measured by a seat at a table where you are treated as invisible or disposable. Instead, it is found in the community you build with those who respect your boundaries, celebrate your achievements, and stand beside you because they truly value your presence rather than what they can extract from you. Your history and your hard work belong to you alone, and you are never obligated to sign them away just to keep the peace for people who would never dream of doing the same for you. It is entirely possible to walk through the fire of betrayal and emerge on the other side with a life that is authentically your own, built on a foundation of integrity, self-respect, and clear, unbreakable boundaries. Choosing yourself is not a betrayal of the past. It is the first step toward a future where you are no longer a background character in a story written by someone else. Now that you have seen how one person can successfully dismantle a lifetime of manipulation by simply refusing to play their assigned role, I want you to consider your own life. Have you ever stayed in a situation longer than you should have because you felt responsible for keeping the peace? And if so, what is the one boundary you are finally ready to set today to protect your own well-being?